Hi, everyone. I am Alolita Sharma, and thank you, Debbie, for the introduction. I changed the title of my talk a little bit because, again, the objective, of my talk really was to discuss, how do we get a larger audience and a larger set of people involved in our communities, in language communities, and especially in growing language data, which is critical to the growth of all the language tools that serve all the platforms that we are building. So with that in mind, again, I'd like this to be an interactive conversation. If you have questions, feel free to ask in the middle or just hold them till the end if you want to have a more detailed conversation. I do want to talk about, as I said, Gen Z. It is representative of the next few billion people on this planet. And talk a bit about the language coverage that we have today in CLDR specifically, and also explore strategies for engaging the new generation of linguists, linguists, language engineers, just general engineers, and the larger global communities who work around language content and digital access. So how many of you interact with new developers coming on your teams on a daily basis? All of us do, right? I mean, we are hiring constantly in the companies we work in, and also the communities and open source projects that we work on. And it's always that great mix of people that makes our language communities so valuable. And one of the things that is unique to the new generation that's coming in, which is a very important fact based around which this talk is centered, is that the new generation, Gen Z generation, is truly 100% digital, right? Day one, they are using all kinds of smart devices, different devices from childhood, and they're very used to communicating, collaborating, interacting online. So that's a huge benefit, as well as a disadvantage, right? Because things are changing, and as a new generation comes in to build cooler tools, smarter tools, and smarter platforms, and which are all language enabled, how do we actually leverage that with existing projects that have been foundations of all the language data consumption that's being driving and fueling our applications, our platforms, our companies. So specifically diving into Unicode CLDR. So how many of you use CLDR? All of us do, right? And of course, Unicode conference is a self-selecting audience, because all of us do work on Unicode in some way or the other, or interact with it. But nonetheless, even the application engineers and designers and linguists who are joining in still interact with Unicode in some way or the other, and data is a core part of that. So Unicode CLDR is the world's repository, if you will, of all kinds of language data. And I'd like to give an example. I'd like to start with an example here. This lady, Nirmala Devi, she lives in Rameshwaram in Tamil Nadu in India. She orders, she has a phone, she has a smartphone, or where she can order household goods online, and is expecting to receive a delivery for goods, right, that she ordered online. So the question that comes up here is that what is the name that she's using online to order a product or make an order online? Usually it would be Mrs. Nirmala Chettiar, right? Which is the format that you would have on most online forums for applications that you're using online whether that's through a phone, or whether that's through a desktop browser, or any other platform, maybe even a tablet. But mostly a phone, because at the end of the day, phones are the most popular way that the folks across the world are using online products. What was the name, now I ask, she would like to use? And this is an very, very common problem or an issue. She'd like to use RC Nirmala Devi. And why is that the case? Because that's her real name. That's her name. Nirmala Devi is the way that women are addressed in by their own name, which is Nirmala in this case, and RC usually in the local version of the name that they're using would be the location. The first initial represents the location where they're from, and the second initial would be Chettiar, which would be perhaps her family name or her father's name or a surname, which is from the family, or even her husband's name. But what you're seeing here is that there is an forced adaptation that is going on here, where in order to fill in the form in the way that the online application has presented the format, you'd have to actually change the way you write your name or the way you use your name. And this is a very common problem that most online applications have, whether that's banking applications or whether that's online shopping applications or others. So this is an example of the type of data in terms of specific locale-based name formats that CLDR could have. And I say could because it doesn't. So what is the objective here? The objective is that the end user should get an user experience that they are comfortable and local and familiar with. And at the same time, the online retailer or the place that she is buying the product from online should be able to provide a good user experience, a better user experience, so that the user comes back and buys more products, or they are trusted and they earn trust in the local community that they are serving. This matters a lot, right? Yes? She could, but usually, Chettiar would be considered the last name if you were to translate it into a Latin or a Western format, and that's common practice. So she could use Devi, but that's not a last name, right? Nirmala Devi is a first name most of the time. Yeah.
So notice you're saying that she's presented with a form that says, what is your last name? And she's not going to put Devi there.
That's correct. Yes. Because Devi is also considered a salutation. Yes.
I'm not sure they use credit cards in India, but somehow she's going to pay for that. And at least in countries like the US and so on, you would usually try to put in the form what more or less what's on your credit card, because if that doesn't match, the payment doesn't go through on that kind of thing. Is there any consideration like that for this case?
There is a consideration, but this is it's a larger problem. So there are always options in Asia, for example, India also, that you can pay cash on delivery. So you don't necessarily need to provide credit card information, first of all. And secondly, if there are credit cards that are associated, it would still get normalized to a form with a last name, middle name, and a first name, as is standard internationally, right? So it's not necessarily that a banking application or a credit card is providing you with a local way of actually using your name. So this is, not an unusual problem. And this exists, in 1.5 billion people in India and other more, folks across the world, because, people adapt their names to what needs to be entered on the form. It's not necessarily the way they use it locally. So that's something that is a consideration. And this is a name formats are super important to be able to deliver a last mile user experience that actually builds trust with the user. This is just one example. There are many fields and many ways that CLDR could provide those formats, those patterns in the data that CLDR has. So the reason I present this is because this is exemplary of many other fields, and I'd like you to think about, what are some of the other fields that other types of data that you have encountered in the applications that you're building, or the user research that you've done, or the customers that you speak with, where you get this kind of disconnect in the data versus the user experience that you're trying to provide. So moving on, every one of us knows Unicode serves as a building block and a foundational block for all software that supports our platforms. It is the largest and most extensive standard repo for locale data that is trusted and is used by literally hundreds of thousands of applications and thousands of organizations. So it's but natural that when people look at formats and think about, okay, how do we actually implement a particular field on a particular form, they do go and refer to CLDR and try to see if that is available in CLDR or not. So at a glance, for those, all of you have used CLDR, but this is just a snapshot of what are all the things it provides today, right? And you can see that there are locale-specific patterns for dates, times, time zones, numbers, currency, translations across locales of language scripts, currencies, again, you can read through this, and even emoji descriptions nowadays, right? And then you have language and script information. You have many times plurals, gender, capitalization, sorting and searching, collation rules, writing direction. So again, very, very foundational elements that are used by all our applications when we are actually trying to build user interfaces and user experiences that are accurate and reliable and easy to use for the end user. And we pretty much follow the BCP 47, locale support, and also provide keyboard inputs and fonts which are related to those locales. So this is just, what it has today. And it's okay, but it's not everything, right? So look at the language coverage that CLDR has, and this is very interesting. We cover about 225 languages. And out of 7,111 languages that exist on this planet, and 51% of which are stable languages, even if you were to take a factor of 23 languages representing 50% of the world's population, that still leaves a few billion more to support and a few more languages to add to CLDR. And that's the opportunity. Yeah, Lokesh. Stable is defined by growing and used, commonly. So that means that the language is not endangered, the language is not being propped up, and is actually actively used by millions of people. Yes? Can you repeat your question?
So you have 225 CLDR languages. What percentage of the world population does that cover?
It's a good question. I'd like to kind of analyze that, and I'll probably share that a bit more. I haven't checked, but I think that it is about 70%, I would say. If you were to stretch, Mark, you have a number?
Yeah, it's a little bit tricky to figure out because a lot of times one of the goals is
Yes, absolutely. Cool. That so to reiterate that, thank you, Mark. I mean, uh, 80 languages, as you said, cover 87%, 90, 97%, the functional use. Right. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Good point. Stephen?
Yeah, I think a related question to this is that I think the 7,000 figure is not accounting for what CLDR considers macro language
That's correct.
families.
Yep.
So one interesting thing would be take 225 and expand it to CLDR's notion of macro language. For example, the Fula languages of of Fulani Fular
Yep.
will be separated into 6 or 7.
Yep.
That would be part of 7,000, but the CLDR has 1.
That's
So
correct.
if you take that 225 and expand it out to
Yep.
macro languages that CLDR covers. Also, 225 is in the common data.
That's correct.
The data CLDR is good.
Yep.
So there are other languages
which are in the supplemental.
which need to be brought up and need
Agreed.
help with. So
Agreed. So I mean, again, this is the core, and as Stephen said, that's exactly the discussion that we want to have. That the supplemental data that is there, as well as other languages that macro languages that we'd like to support. How do we actually enable that, and how do we drive more data for those areas? So there are two things that you're seeing here. One phenomenon is of the existing core languages which exist in CLDR today, which do provide functional coverage more or less for 97% of people who are using data today and devices today. And then what is aspirational in terms of what targets we would like to reach out to, right? So again, this is a slide is perhaps a combination of aspirational, level setting versus also expansion of what exists functionally today. But nonetheless, it's very interesting, right? Because we are functionally providing coverage for what exists today with the 225 major in languages in core. But we'd also like to provide far more granularity beyond that. So what I'd like to talk about is strategies that I have, leveraged in my experience and are common in open source and open data projects to collect high quality data. Now, this goes above and beyond what companies and large enterprises spend to collect data, to curate data, to translate data, which is a completely different pipeline from what I'm talking about here. Because that exists, and that exists to support the 80 major languages, as Mark mentioned, and even goes up to hundreds of languages for being able to support fonts, keyboards, and all the language assets that we make available in CLDR, as well as data that is translated, and literally billions of dollars are spent by companies to have high quality translation data available for different locales. So I want to touch a bit about, again, how do you collect high quality data beyond the core languages and the core priorities of companies. And this serves, the longer tail languages or the, new communities that are coming online, and new a new generation that actually will be using many of these languages. So community, there are three areas that really drive the strategies that are leveraged for collection of data and high quality data. Community, people-driven collection initiatives, and I'll deep dive a bit into that right after. Organizational-driven data collection programs. Many companies run different kinds of programs and initiatives to collect data. And then policy and license-driven initiatives, which are a combination of intergovernmental or organizational partnerships and a lot of sharing, as well as policy-driven initiatives that drive collection of data at, say, country levels or national levels or state levels. So let's deep dive into a community-driven approach. And the reason I emphasize upon this is because if we as Unicode Consortium or a CLDR project want to be able to reach, the rest of the billions of people that we would like to serve with our mission, we need to, leverage people power and people-driven communities. And that would drive a lot of the long-tail data that is not necessarily priorities of corporations. So some of the activities that are very commonly used by open source projects and large open data projects are face-to-face, regular iterative face-to-face data days where people get together, spend time, select different languages, different locales, work together on actually collecting data on the ground, and then submitting it to the projects that they are working on. Similarly, online data donation campaigns. This is very popular in the Wikipedia world, where you would run a translation hackathon online for any global community to join in for 8 hours. And you'll have a translation, hackathon online, where you'll collect literally, significant amounts of data for long-tail languages and long-tail locales. And that's phenomenal. It's just exciting. Hackathons to verify submitted data, because once you've collected data, you also have to make sure it's usable, it's in the right formats, it can be consumable and pushed into the repositories that we are looking to drive. And also social media campaigns. So these are very popular in the open source world, which are used in combination to driving locale, really high quality locale data. Incentives for participation, because as you know, open source is driven on reputation as much as it's driven on recognition and rewards. Very different world from, what you would have in an paid-only campaign that's running through a company. So that's, where you're looking at what drives people to be able to come together and get motivated to contribute high-quality data and verify and provide that back. Recognition is a huge factor. People care about being known for the work and the social impact that they have in the community. And long-tail languages absolutely benefit from that. Rewards, instant rewards could be, so something as simple as swag. And again, there are many companies that actually have great campaigns around that. But in Wikipedia's universe, Wikidata, many open source projects, Apache, again, it's something that people, are happy with, because that's something that they are very proud to be associated with and contributed to. And similarly, gamification of these incentives, where there are actually layers, like in the Ubuntu world, for example, there's something called karma points. The more you contribute, whether that's data, whether that's code or documentation, you have earned more karma. And that matters as you carry your reputation in the community. So if you're a mentor, for example, Wikipedia has Barn stars. Twitter has contributor badges. So again, there are fundamental ways that communities relate to, work with each other, and drive language data to be, contributed back to the projects. I'd like to see this for CLDR. Yes.
So the CLDR in its service will actually have some of this. There's a progress bar and there's little check marks that show, and there's kind of a leaderboard, if you will. It's not quite to the level of Barn stars, but there's some aspect of that
right.
in the process.
Right. Which is pretty exciting, because I think that we're seeing, as the tool improves and the contribution process improves.
But it's not something where you can get a badge,
right.
external badge or something. But maybe there's something to said for that.
Yeah, and it's something that is an opportunity for us to explore too.
And acknowledgement, yes.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Put your name here. I've helped with my language. So.
Yeah. So again, these are areas that I'd like to explore with you on how we can actually build it into building out CLDR data for long tail and other languages which are underserved. Then there's the top-down strategy, right? And this absolutely works hand in glove with community-driven initiatives. And top-down strategies for open source and open data projects is something that's essential and is actually practiced very widely in the open source community. Organization-driven data collection programs, where funding is provided, like the Unicode Consortium, has a great example of the funding for disadvantaged languages that the Unicode Consortium provides. And those kind of sponsorship and funding programs are very key in actually building out rich data sets for languages. Promotional campaigns, for third-party platforms, sponsoring events and activities where there is collaboration across, campaigns where you are collecting data and working with other organizations, and highlighting and hiring heroes. And that matters, right? Because at the end of the day, language is integrally connected to people and all the software that we build and deliver for them. So it is important to maintain and sponsor that cycle in order for communities to thrive and communities to be able to give back and drive some of the language data that we are looking at building out for projects, important projects like CLDR. Then there are license and policy-driven initiatives. And I mentioned this specifically because it's very important for data to be licensed with open data licenses and open source licenses, because that drives up the usage of the data that is being collected and the sharing of it, so that all the tools that we build are better quality and better serving the users that we are trying to build them for. Partnering with governments at local, state, and federal levels to formulate data policies, so a lot of collaboration. And the Unicode Consortium actually does that in a lot of projects. But also to build repositories for long-tail languages, which many countries actually fund at the local level, whether that's different countries in Asia or in Latin America or even in Africa and even in the EU. And as well as running collaborative programs together. Again, I go back to Wikipedia and Wikimedia's close collaboration, work with a global set of governments to be able to run programs and be able to drive quality data that is coming back into the multilingual content repositories. So there's no reason why CLDR should not be part of that universe too. And then, of course, interoperability and standards-driven initiatives, which are based on industry-driven consortium efforts, right? For example, W3C, Unicode, IDNA are all good examples of how companies work together and collaborate in order to provide very valuable software that serves the larger industry, as well as valuable data. And as we go into the world of speech and voice, again, I'd like to say that there are some industry consortiums that are forming around vendors who are now starting to collect and collaborate on collecting voice and speech data. But there's a lot more to be done there because the same kind of collaboration actually needs to occur as it is. Maybe the next generation of CLDR will have speech data too. So again, it's really thinking as to what would we like to see CLDR to be in 5 years from now, in a decade from now, and what would it be represented as. So I'll end with this, but again, few key takeaways. Long story short, CLDR has to grow. Engagement is key. We absolutely have to reach out to larger and more communities and need all of your participation to actually build this out, to build communities and to build ambassadors, because every person is an ambassador of CLDR when you're using it. And get the next generation involved, all of you and beyond that, where we provide smart applications with great user experience and better tools to collect data, because I think that we're not there. It has to be a seamless experience where you can actually have applications on a phone or a tablet or, integrated into social platforms where you can actually have people able to contribute data easily. We've learned it the hard way because, at the end of the day, we're all curmudgeons now. And we worked on this for a long time. But I'd like to see more people actually participate in this. Gamifying the user experience and making it a social and educational opportunity. Because it is. For the rest of the world that is not participating yet, this is an educational process. And to be able to contribute and participate and contribute data to CLDR, that matters. And leveraging all the devices that every kid has on the block to be able to do that. And drive that data back to CLDR. So with that, thank you. And any more questions? I'm happy to take them. Yeah, Martin.
Yeah, my name is Martin Beers, and I'm at University.
Oh.
I just had a question. Could you give a few more examples, or more informational examples, which work or so? You just had a little bit of a smart question.
On which one?
Yeah,
On.
for example, this one.
Yes. Okay. So yes, I can certainly do that. So as I mentioned, both specifically in the worlds of open source and open data, there are several types of hackathons and data donation campaigns that are run on a regular basis. And these are, again, campaigns that you can I can forward links and add them here, that are very popular and are targeted towards language communities in different geographies. So for example, in the EU, we ran hackathons and online data campaigns to be able to not only collect data for specific locales that were being used in the EU, but also helping verify data. And then the top 3 contributors were, honored on one of the pages with their names called out that, hey, they contributed the most amount of data and participated the most for this 8 hours, right? So again, these are pretty popular campaigns. And Twitter, for example, you've seen contributor badges. It's very popular with all the social content platforms, but also with a lot of other related translation projects where people participate and actually contribute data. Do you want other specific examples, Martin?
No, maybe others have questions, but otherwise, as many as you have.
Well, building off of that, do you have an example? So that, then like Twitter, like these big companies get the data, is there a really good showcase of an example where then that's always being distributed back, or are there companies that can keep the data and not, right? Because I see there's getting expanded
mean the long tail? Like there's two ways we're kind of doing it, right? Like we're depending on the companies to provide that, and they do some vetting, and it's usually pretty good quality. And sure, they're doing their own kind of crowdsourcing, and then there's kind of a direct CLDR method where we let people kind of directly go in and do this. So I guess for the company pipeline, is there a really good example of where it's getting collected and actually funneled almost all of it back to CLDR, or is that a challenge right now?
So again, it depends on the company, obviously, but most of the time, I mean, my experience has been the most successful campaigns mandate an open source license or an open data license. So all the data will be available in the open and on a GitHub project, or going back to a particular data repository, Wikidata, for example, and it can be a company-driven initiative or a foundation-driven initiative for open source projects. But the commitment is that all the data that is being collected will actually be available publicly, and the guarantee is the licenses and the where the data will be hosted. So that definitely is used a lot. Obviously, there are also other programs where it isn't used that way, right? But the most effective campaigns are where that commitment is made with open licenses, open data licenses, and open source content being available. Yes.
Just a question. It seems like most of the strategies in green generation has to do with an assumption that the participants have a desire for visibility and public recognition. Have you seen any example of people being kind of not liking that? I'll give an example. When unmanaged CLDR contributions have had linguists request to be anonymized, it says that don't display my full name, just the initials. And that is even in the context of the CLDR service tool, which is all where the names are only visible for people with user accounts.
I think.
I'm wondering if a different generation has the desire just to do the work and maybe not be social and recognize public.
So it's a very good question you ask, because I think that one of the things that is, that really builds trust in the open communities where data as well as software is built is the ability to have avatars which are not necessarily related to your real identity, right? So it is a choice that is made available to everyone who's contributing data, that if they have a login, they could have a pseudonym. Wikipedia does that, and many other open source communities do that. There is no mandate to actually have to tie it to your real ID and your, personal information. And the other restrictions that usually I've seen are in translation communities where translators are contributing on their individual time and don't necessarily want their translation companies that they work for to, dock them on it. So there are two, major factors there. Obviously, one is privacy and the ability to respect it for those who would like to, and the ability and the other part is really protecting people, from employment, harassment, or if you would like to put it that way, because they're contributing on their own initiative. So yes, I've seen that phenomenon. But in open source communities, it's super important to do that, right? That is where you don't have to necessarily try contributions to exactly who contributed it. Because yes, Shane.
Yeah, so was wondering, CLDR is really complex and has a lot of room for errors in data collection, and a lot of crowdsourced tools are, really, good for yes or no questions. So with the CLDR, the data is very, very, very complex and a lot of other factors that go into having volume data. do a lot of work in IT, for example, is that there's a lot of cases where, especially for low resource languages, but even in some cases for medium to high resource languages, there's formats where there's like a space between the unit and the month, but not between the unit and the day, which is or where like half of the string is in system over string that month. There's a lot of strange inconsistencies there. So I guess my question is, how do you, so we can, how do you discuss how we can like engage people and engage in the process, but how do we always scale quality?
So,
And allow them to
Mark, do you want to answer?
Yeah, what we try to do is we notice that there are problems and we actually use the study to test that at least one people, here you're putting this space between the and the here you're not. We don't go to that, but a lot of other cases where we try to mechanically find or in some cases, my favorite case was when somebody, I think it was in Portuguese, in the middle of a country, there was this description of a talking bird. This is what I came out of Amazon. This long sequence of characters and numbers and descriptions of the okay, that's wrong.
Steven?
Yeah, and maybe I can turn what you were saying, Shane, into a call to action. That is, I think there's a engineering opportunity for improving how their data can be brought up for some kind of languages. I'm trying to help someone work on the Tiwali language of Pakistan. If you're interested in that, let me know,
cool.
Stephen. But and they're trying to do this as a pull request. But there's engineering work that could be done to make the better process. Right. The original CLDR was actually a survey tool back in IBM ICIR. It said, please write this date in your language. Please write this number. Mark, you might remember this database. And it wasn't computer consumed. It was just for normal people to write into. And there's been at least two other efforts. Afrigen project did a bunch of work with languages of Africa. I did an item, easy steps. I can show you where these are stratified. The stratified remains of these at some point, but if someone's willing to do some engineering work to try to bridge this gap to bring new content in, I think it could be effective.
Mike?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of room for that. I know when we gathered data on role rules, we found the only real way to do it is to have people have translation for like one sentence and then extract out what they're using as rules, because we ask people to do that wrong. And that's the first step that works pretty well. We could be refining on, but that is fairly big. So, I mean, some things you can use the and we want tools that are able to do that.
Yep.
And extract and figure out.
Yeah, and that goes back to my point again to reinforce that, you have to provide well-written interfaces and smart applications to be able to leverage a larger audience to contribute back, right? Because again, those of us who have been working on this are very familiar with the tools that we have at this point, and that doesn't necessarily scale to the next, 1,000 languages. And the other aspect that Shane, you brought up, which is very common and very well done in Wikidata's universe, which has far more data than CLDR, is that there are hackathons and regular meetups to verify data. And that is something that, if you think of yourself as a moderator versus a contributor, again, there are different types of contributors, right? People who are initially submitting data and then other folks who are verifying it, or it could be the same folks even if they're experts, right? So again, it is, different members or different types of community members who are working together to vet out that data and ensure that it is of high quality and it is consistent and available and usable in a repo like repository like CLDR.
Data quality, I think it would be great to have similar tool that's specifically for crowdsourcing data quality.
Yes, I agree.
Like, I don't know, like yes or no questions, like is this list of strings self-consistent?
Yep. No, and that's a good point, Shane, because most of us who are writing applications where we used CLDR formats and CLDR data actually do that in our applications, right? Because we do verify the user input that we are taking. The only thing is that it should be available as a tool, a verification tool at the CLDR level, right? And absolutely. Oh. How are you volunteering? I'm happy to work with you on that. But next time, I think I'll come with a checklist of all the tools that you guys can sign up for and work with me on. So thank you again, and thank you.